All right, sorry for the late time, but we are calling this session of the Planning Commission to order. First of all, if I can please ask you to stand for the flag salute and the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, Ms. Lust, if you could do roll call.
Commissioner Glavin. Commissioner Mullinex.
Present.
Vice Chair Amerman.
Present.
Commissioner Flynn.
Present.
Commissioner Butler.
Present.
Commissioner Tyler. And Commissioner Wolf.
Present.
Ms. Lust, do we have any late changes to the agenda?
We do not have any late changes, thank you. And I will note that Chair Tyler is an excused absence from this evening's meeting.
Thanks for that update. All right, we're now going to open our public comment period. Anyone requesting to speak to the commission may request to speak at this time. If you have not provided notice in advance to speak during the public comment period, please use raised hand feature in Zoom. Clark will send you permission to unmute your microphone and you'll be able to make comments. Over the phone, please press *9 to raise your hand and then press *6 to unmute. If you're here in the audience, you may just approach the podium and provide your address and name, and you'll have 3 minutes to speak to the commission on anything not covered in our agenda tonight by a hearing or other business. Do we have anybody online or in the audience that wants to speak to the commission on any other topic? Anybody in the audience? Yes, please approach. Go ahead.
Sir, I'm really sorry to interrupt you, but that microphone is off. I can come turn it on for you. You might have it, just that button. There you go, perfect.
Can you hear me now?
We can hear you now.
Okay, very good. Might have to go up a little bit here. My name is William Aidens. I live on 2224 South Royal Court. And my question, I know it's probably lower priority, but I am very interested to know if there's a plan for the future for walking paths that will link up to other neighborhoods. And right now, the Royal Terrace is kind of isolated, and walking up to Royal to Hillhurst is pretty treacherous. And I was just curious if that was part of the planning and what timeline that might be. Anyway, walking paths to get up to other neighborhoods, to maybe you can go down to the north side and walk down that way. So anyway, we'll have a lot of walking people, and we're just curious if there's a timeline on some of those paths. And that's all I had.
I apologize for not mentioning one thing at the beginning. It's just a point of procedure. Unfortunately, we are not able to interact during these sessions to answer questions, but I promise you that that answers will be addressed, and there are good answers specifically to that question. So we'll take care of that later. And thanks for your comments.
Thank you for listening. I appreciate it for your consideration.
Yes. Thank you so much for your comments.
Hi, I'm Janice Van Wyhe. I moved to Ridgefield just north of it in '96. I own 2 of the 30,000 horses in the county. I spend approximately $14,000 a year buying feed, a lot of it from the fields that are now houses thanks to the growth, buying vet supplies, hiring the vets, going to the feed stores, this, that, and the other. I spend it locally. There are many of us out there. And as far as I can tell, and I've got to admit, I struggle with my PC and my big screen trying to figure out alternative 2 and alternative 3 in the growth plan. what the heck is going on. But as far as I can tell, and from what I've heard, you are not really allowing the few stables that are there in the Ridgefield Planning Growth Management area to stay. I could be wrong, but that's my understanding. If I am correct, I think it's a gross error. The people that own horses tend to have higher incomes. We always vote. We care very much about the lifestyle. That's why we're here and not in the hinterlands of Portland. Do understand that the people that live in these little houses with their tiny yards want to be near horses. I spend so much time at Whipple Creek doing horse ambassador and letting the people that live in these houses pet the pony because they love him and he loves them. But you need to let these people have their chance at owning that pony and sticking it in the nearby, not far away across the county, boarding stable. So do what you can to accommodate the rural while you cope as best you can with the growth. And if you have any questions, my information is out there and I'm happy to provide more later. Thank you.
Do we have any else local or online that would like to speak to the commission on any business not on the agenda tonight?
Well, it is on the agenda, but that's why I'm here. Because I know you're going to be talking about alternative 2 or 3. And I guess one question I have, although I know you can't answer it, is why are they called alternatives? Like, what was the original plan if these are alternatives 2 and 3? And I am not a huge fan of where Ridgefield is going. We've lost so much green space and pasture land and habitat. In looking at alternative 2 and 3, I prefer alternative 3 because it keeps, I think, less sprawl and more compact, although it does impact a lot of rural space. I also think it would be really sad if you chose alternative 2 because it would then allow the development of a beautiful equine facility, the Emerald Valley Stables. It's kind of iconic for Ridgefield, for that to be developed and turned into houses. So that's my 2 cents.
All right, last chance for anybody online or local who would like to speak on anything that is not part of a public hearing tonight. And just to be clear, we do have a public hearing tonight, so if that is what you're here to speak about, that will come along shortly. Thank you.
So my name is Lisa Fix. I'm at 2017 Northeast 259th Street in Ridgefield. I'm currently, I believe my driveway is very close to the urban growth boundary from the 2030 plan. I do think that I've been here 25 years. I'm still not an OG of Ridgefield, the original gang, but I feel like I should have a voice in very similar comments so far about the rural community that moved here, to enjoy that, to share that. As far as where we get hay, yeah, it's getting farther and farther, closer and closer to Yakult to actually get anything. But Ridgefield in itself, this was a beautiful community, and it still is in lots of ways. But I think when we look at the development and we look at some of the things that seem to be important, I'm thinking we might be missing the piece of Ridgefield that made Ridgefield so amazing. And I hope you can consider that. I'm also an equine person. I also am in farm tax deferral, so it's part of my income, part of my life, part of my lifestyle. Why I moved from Portland 25 years ago, to be to live that hobby farm ability. And I think it's important that we don't lose all of those things. And as it's creeping across I-5, it is a little bit nerve-wracking. And I do my best to do as much business in Ridgefield proper itself and keep everything alive. But I just would caution how we develop, what we exclude, what we forget, and what we might be missing in our community. I too ride a lot of horses at Whipple Creek, and sometimes I don't ride there because of the amount of people that want to stop and pet your horse. And I have some horses that are pretty good with that, and some horses, you know, they're not. And I just hope that we keep some of that in mind as we go over the I-5 onto the other side. There's lots of space if you go through the dollar distribution warehouse area. There's tons and tons of office space that says they need renting. They're open, they're vacant. I don't know how much more we need. So I know it's a 20-year plan, and I'll be an old lady, really old lady by then, but I'll probably still be riding my horse, so I hope so. Thank you.
Can I have a motion for the approval of the minutes from our last meeting?
I motion to approve the minutes.
I second the motion.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
I'll abstain. Thanks.
Motion passed. Next, we have a public hearing, and I'll turn this over to Ms. Lust for a presentation, I assume.
That's correct. Thank you, Vice Chair Ammerman. So the business item before you this evening is going to be presentation, discussion, and public hearing on land use alternatives or options for the 2025 to 2045 comprehensive plan update, which is a process we've been working on since, oh gosh, late 2023 now. It is a very all-encompassing process looking at not just land use, but housing, economic development, parks and trails, capital facilities, transportation over the next 20 years in Ridgefield and Ridgefield's urban growth area. So with that, I will go ahead and jump into my presentation, and then I'll be turning it back to the commission for initial Q&A discussion. Then we'll move into the public hearing. Then we'll take it back to the commissioners, and you all will have the opportunity, if you wish, to make a recommendation for City Council, who will be seeing this later this month. All right, so I'll start out by giving some background on the project and where we've been so far. The purpose of coming up with land use alternatives, and I'll use alternative and option interchangeably because they do mean the same thing in this case. But the purpose is when the city does a 20-year comprehensive plan update process, which is something we are required by state to do periodically under the Growth Management Act. We are looking at the basic questions of how much is the area projected to grow in the next 20 years in terms of people, housing, jobs, and given those numbers, where does that growth make sense? Where does it not make sense? What's it going to look like over the next 20 years? So an important step of doing that is coming up with some maps that show options of what that can look like. And then as a community, as Planning Commission, as council, getting our input on those maps, reacting to those different options, and coming up with eventually a preferred alternative that sort of captures the vision. So in 2024, our project team initially developed 2 land use map options that would accommodate the population, housing, and job growth allocated to Ridgefield and its urban growth area through 2045. And that includes housing at different income levels, which is a new requirement of the state this update cycle. So the first alternative 1, basically looked at maintaining existing land use patterns in the city and in the urban growth area, but to accommodate growth, kind of doing an overall density increase across the city. The second alternative said, how could we look at that a little bit differently? And instead of doing that kind of overall density increase, looked at areas for more intensified mixed-use hubs while leaving other areas at a lower density to achieve the same goal with a different balance, basically. Another factor in this process is that in early 2024, Clark County opened up UGA expansion requests. So they opened up the opportunity for property owners whose properties are not currently in an urban growth area to submit to them and say, we would like to be added to Ridgefield or Camas or Vancouver or La Center, Washougal's urban growth area. So in both of the initial land use options, we did look at those expansion requests that were adjacent to our UGA. Option 1 and option 2 both factored in every single property owner expansion request that is adjacent to our existing UGA. In June 2024, we held our first study session with City Council, sort of vetting those two early options with them. They expressed an initial interest leaning towards the model with more mixed-use hubs in some areas and lower densities in other areas, but they also requested us to go back and come up with a third alternative, a third option that sort of picked some elements of both 1 and 2 and looked at a couple different things. We had a similar study session and presentation with Planning Commission on August 7th, discussing those initial land use scenarios. Had a lot of similar feedback from Planning Commission at that time. In September, we held a community workshop and then a subsequent online survey that had a kind of high-level mapping exercise in it. We asked people, show on this map, where would growth make sense to you? Where would growth not make sense to you? And hey, Ridgefield's gonna have to accommodate a certain number of new housing units across different income levels over the next 20 years. Where does that kind of growth specifically make sense? So working with feedback from Planning Commission and Council and the public feedback from that workshop and survey, we did develop a third alternative, which if you've read the packet or participated in the survey that was live until last Wednesday, this is the one that was called Alternative 3. Alternative 3 included, similar to Alternative 2, some of those mixed-use hubs. It reduced the number of UGA, or urban growth area expansions, to just 2. One on the north side of the city, just west of I-5, and one on the south side of the city that's kind of an island near Carty Road. On December 5th, we had a second study session with council showing them, okay, these are 3 land use scenarios. Can we narrow it back down to 2 to analyze going forward? They settled on 2 and 3, which are the ones we'll see the more detailed maps on coming up. This whole process really ties into what Clark County is doing with their comprehensive plan update too. So on December 6th, they had a hearing on land use alternatives related to their draft environmental impact statement. And because council had indicated that options or alternatives 2 and 3 were favorable to analyze going forward, we advocated that the county also include those in their analysis, and they are. So we're consistent on that front for now. Fast forward to January this year, we took those 2 remaining options and opened up a second survey on Ridgefield Roundtable, asking people pretty broadly, what do you like, what do you dislike about these options? And got some really good responses to that survey, which I'll be sharing in this meeting. And then closing out our little timeline here of where we've been, just 2 weeks ago, council also looked at those same options that were on the survey, had a discussion over them, talked about relative risks of the two. We'll go into that a little bit too in my presentation. But that brings us to where we are today here with you, Planning Commission. All right, so now I am going to move in to these two land use maps we're considering. I'll say that as usual, when we are kind of present this group with two options to look at, it doesn't necessarily have to be either or. We can talk about elements from one or the other that you like or dislike too. We expect to do further work on this moving forward. So this is the one, is alternatives 2 and 3, which I felt was confusing because there wasn't a 1 anymore. So I'm calling them options 1 and 2 now. So option 1, you may know as alternative 2, but I think I'm going to stick with this going forward. So this option, and I know it's a lot of colors, a lot of symbols, a lot of labels. When we get to this point in the process, that is kind of the level of detail that needs to be shown. But I'll do my best here to give a good overall description of the key points here and the key things that would be different from what we see on our zoning map today. So I'll start with the proposed urban growth area expansions. Those are areas 1, 8, 9, and 10 to the north and east. And then area 3A, which is the southernmost label on the map. So again, these are all property owner initiated urban growth area expansion requests. Being added to the urban growth area is not the same as annexation. Properties in the urban growth area are eligible to apply for annexation at the property owner's request. This action would add them to the urban growth area, which means they're considered as part of our 20-year planning horizon, but they're not in the city limits. All right, I mentioned mixed-use hubs. Both of these maps will show similar ones, but they are number 4, which is the waterfront and downtown area. Numbers 5, 6, 7 in the middle there are around Pioneer and Royal, where we already see some mix of uses between residential and commercial, such as Rose Hours, Pioneer Village. And then an area where they're in the current boundary, where there are a number of undeveloped parcels, is area 2. Which in both of these maps is modeled as another mixed-use hub that would kind of fan out from Clark College and the junction there. And then the remaining area on this map, again, it'll show on both of the maps, is 3B in the south. That's the kind of brownish with diagonal stripes area. This is an interesting spot. It's already in the urban growth area, and the land use designation is already urban medium density. So in this model, we are maintaining that over the next 20 years. All right, I'm gonna go ahead and show the next map so we can get a bit of comparison, and then I will share some of what council discussed, as well as our results from the online survey, looking at both of these maps. All right, so high level on this one, just to keep with you as I move forward. This is the option with more urban growth area expansions as part of it. All right, option 2, AKA alternative 3. You'll notice right away that a couple of things. First of all is that a lot of those mixed-use hubs look similar in this one. So downtown waterfront, just east of the freeway around Clark College, and then near Pioneer and Royal, where Rose Hours is. You'll also notice that there are fewer of those property owner-initiated UGA expansion requests. The ones east of the freeway have come off the map in this case, and it focuses instead on just 2 UGA expansion requests. Again, that's different than annexation. So area 8 is that large area in the north, and then 2A is the smaller area in the south near Carty Road. Now, the final difference on this map is that it looks at areas 6, G Creek Plateau, 5, Carty Road area, 7A, 7B, 7C. Those are all areas that are currently in the urban growth boundary. This alternative basically assumes that at some point over the next 20 years, which is our planning horizon, that property owners in those areas would annex. Again, an assumption is an assumption. Annexation is at the behest of property owners or groups of property owners. But for the sake of modeling alternatives, this one, because it has fewer urban growth area expansions, says, yeah, let's assume over the next 20 years, those other urban growth areas do annex. Whereas option 1, sort of in exchange for adding more UGA area, says, well, let's assume the ones already in the UGA maybe don't annex. So that's the difference there between those two. All right. Council had a study session on this on January 23rd, and something I really wanted to highlight from their discussion is we kind of talked about relative risk and reward of these different options. As I've mentioned, this is happening in concert with the county's land use alternatives analysis and comprehensive plan update. So we are required to be consistent with them. And as I mentioned earlier, they are including both of these options in their analysis currently. So something to sort of note here is that all of the property owner initiated UGA expansion requests, those properties are currently designated agriculture or ag, and bringing them into the urban growth area would require an ag de-designation, which is something with a fairly high bar to achieve. And ultimately, we don't know the outcome yet of where the county is going. If they sort of back off from including any expansions, we would kind of have to turn back and roll with that. There is also a risk for appeal with any ag de-designation. That said, those property owners requesting to come into the urban growth area have performed analyses on the suitability of ag de-designation for their individual properties. So they have submitted credible analyses to both the city and the county. And the county as well is doing an area-wide or county-wide agricultural analysis, which will hopefully give us more information too as to the impacts of including or not including those properties in the urban growth area. So kind of the trade-off there is that by going for those expansions, there are fewer changes within the existing urban growth area under the option 1 land use model. Option 2, kind of the opposite, although there still are the 2 UGA expansion areas that carry that risk, but fewer than option 1. However, the trade-off for that, in order to accommodate that total amount of growth, people, houses, jobs that we've been allocated, having fewer expansion areas does mean more changes we have to assume within the existing urban growth area. And then as I kind of hinted with either option, if the county's final land use map ultimately tells cities, hey, you have to figure out how to allocate growth within existing urban growth areas only, then we'll have to figure it out. Where does that growth go in the UGA if not in expansions? Okay. The other thing council saw and discussed was the preliminary results to our survey feedback, which of course we got more after that meeting because the survey wasn't closed yet. So in the next couple slides, I've kind of summarized what we heard back from folks in the community, likes and dislikes on options 1 and 2, and I'm sure we will build on this during the public hearing this evening. Pretty mixed bag of results. As you'll see, we had a number of people saying option 1, those expansions are really great. That could relieve congestion in the current city limits, good opportunities for housing out there, liking the opportunities for future job and housing development around Clark College, smaller impact downtown, again, freeing up properties for different uses in those expansion requests. Those are some positives seen for option 1, likes. Dislikes, sort of the opposite side of the coin, too much sprawl on the east side. Too much growth around Carty Road. Development should be in the center near Pioneer and the main roads rather than in those expansion areas. Oh, some thoughts there. I will note that this isn't like one row isn't one person's likes and dislikes. It's a summary on both sides. So that was on option 1, the one with the more expansions. Option 2, fewer expansions, factors in an assumption of more property owner initiated annexations over the next 20 years. Again, kind of a mixed bag of feedback, but a lot of really thoughtful points made around where growth is occurring under this option. Concerns around negative impacts on G Creek Plateau, some of those more rural properties to the north. Concerns around having, on the flip side of that, having higher density housing in areas that are already crowded and have high traffic. Someone commented too much growth in the center of town, not on the east side. Too many annexations versus expansions. So I would say it was a definitely a mixed bag of different likes and dislikes for both of these options, but a lot of really good feedback on both sides of the coin there, I guess, I would say. All right. That is a lot of talking from me. So I'm going to go ahead and flip back to our maps. And I can easily flip back between these two as well, but I'll hand it back to you, Vice Chair, for any initial discussion or questions for me, the Planning Commission may have before we move into the public hearing. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Lust. We're going to go ahead and start on the far left here with any comments and questions.
Thanks. In regards to option 1 and area 10, am I interpreting this correctly that if those parcels were included in the UGA, that there's a center portion that's not?
That's correct. And that is because the owners of the parcels shown in area 10 submitted an expansion request, and those neighboring parcels did not. So we can only consider those that made the request.
All right. That was my question. Thanks.
There's a lot to take in here, a lot of input all around. I think you answered my big question from the letter that we were given today. It's on our, in front of us about the, annexation for this property here. So as I understand, in the second one, I believe, or option 2, alternative 3, to be clear, their worry was being kind of forced into annexation. What is shown here, just to clarify to everyone, is just anticipated people choosing to annex, correct?
Yeah, this model chooses to assume that in those areas 5, 6, 7, A, B, and C, that are already in the urban growth area, already eligible for annexation, the assumption is that over the next 20 years, which is our planning horizon through 2045, that those areas do annex. Whereas in option 1, we're making the assumption that they don't annex, and in exchange for that, those expansion areas could come into the UGA. The trick here is we're planning, right, to accommodate a certain amount of growth over the next 20 years. And if we say, okay, these expansions are going to happen and everyone in the UGA is going to annex and we're going to add a mixed-use hub here and a mixed-use hub there, then we're creating too much capacity, right? We're not allocated that much growth. We're allocated a finite amount of growth, and you can accommodate that in a variety of different ways. But for instance, if you're looking at all of these UGA expansions, you kind of have to nix the assumption that anyone else in the UGA is going to annex.
Gotcha. And a follow-up question to that. So I think that kind of answers my question, actually, about the annexation for this individual. It's not a forced thing; it's just an anticipated thing. But the next question I had: at any point in here have we reached out to our public services like police and fire departments and all that stuff to include their input on being able to support these areas as we sprawl or have higher density out, or vice versa?
Yeah, so as far as fire goes, this is all already in their service area. Police, that's a great point, and I should have that conversation with them, definitely, and we'll do that.
That's all I have. Thank you.
Commissioner Flynn?
Thank you. I've got several questions, and they're scattered a little bit, so I apologize. Just to pick up on where you were just answering, you said something, I'm just paraphrasing, so correct me if I'm wrong, but if we sort of had a combo, I guess, of option 1, option 2, where we expanded the UGA and assumed annexation, that would lead to too much capacity, i.e. too much housing, too much job creation per what the state guidelines are for the city. Is that correct?
That is correct. Yes, we're projected to grow a certain amount, and our job is to figure out where that growth goes, not where more than that growth goes.
So we're threading a needle of we have to plan for enough growth, but not too much growth.
Correct.
Okay. And based on previous projections, and I know that there's the housing affordability addition this time, but how far off have those previous projections been, or those requirements? I mean, did the last time we go through this, did all of a sudden it go up 50% or 25% or?
Yeah, it's been really interesting to look back at those numbers from the last update, which was in 2016. Basically, what happened in Ridgefield is we grew faster than expected. no surprise to anyone there. And as a result of that, our growth curve to 2045, it really flattens out. Our projected growth, our projected population in 2045 is right around 27,000. But if you look at like the delta from where we were in 2016 to where we are now to there, the bulk of that growth rate has already occurred. So the growth curve 2016 to 2024 was, and it's starting to flatten out.
Yeah, we've tripled in size in
Yeah.
the last 9 years, and
Yeah.
then we're not even going to double in the next 20 years.
Correct.
Okay. So the numbers, the requirements may not, I guess the old requirements don't matter that much, but we blew through whatever those expectations
which
were.
is why we're planning for the next 20 years, but we do an update every 10 years. So it's a chance to kind of course correct there, which is what we're doing.
Okay. Back to, you said something about, on annexation, right? So I might get this wrong, but option 1 assumes no annexation for those specific properties. Is that right?
Correct. Option 1 assumes no annexation of any properties that are currently in the urban growth area but not yet in the city limits.
And it's been city policy for at least as long as anyone can remember that the city doesn't initiate annexation, property owners initiate annexation.
Correct. Property owner initiated. It's an application to our planning department.
Do you know of any time where the city has rejected a request for annexation?
Yes.
How many decades ago was that?
Oh, like a few years ago.
Okay.
Yeah.
Could you, without naming names, I guess, could you explain maybe why the city would reject annexation requests?
Yeah. Try to draw on the particular case, but not, singling anyone out. The request was in an area where it was based both on the location of the annexation request and I believe the time it came in. It came in at a time, I think I'm going to say it was 2021, where our residential development was absolutely off the charts in terms of applications coming in, permits issued, and it would have been a property that would have, the designation was for residential, so it would have come in as a residentially zoned property. I think at the time, given all the residential growth we were seeing, council at that time just did not have an appetite for more. It was also in a location where it wasn't close to services. It was kind of an odd area in that way. And not to speak for our council, but I think that may have factored in. I think a big part of it was just the timing, though. Okay,
that makes sense. Same question, I guess, for expansion under the UGA. How frequently does that get rejected?
So UGA expansion can only be considered during the comprehensive plan update process, which has historically been every 8 to 10 years. It is, compared to annexation, it's a much higher bar to hurdle, especially when you are looking at properties that are currently designated for agriculture, because you do have to go through the de-designation process, which involves, reports and studies showing that that is both feasible and appropriate, that those areas are not any longer being used for agriculture and are characterized by urban development, et cetera. In Ridgefield's last update process, We had a mix of annexation requests that were accepted and those that were not. And I won't speak on the details of the history lesson because I'd want to do my research on that. But the area currently developing as Paradise Point, which is just west of Area 1 on the map that's on the screen, that was brought in as a UGA expansion during, gosh, I think it was 2 updates ago, the 2007 or 2008. The southern part of the city around Area 3A, which is shown now, that property and I believe a couple others down there were ones that did not get in on previous requests. So more of a mixed bag there than annexation.
In regards to the assumptions that certain properties would not annex, the property owners can apply at any time.
They can.
The city council can reject or accept. But if we're operating under an assumption, a 20-year window assumption, that we're not going to annex those properties, if the city council were to decide to accept the annexation request, then presumably there need to be some sort of trade, so to speak, of other properties that would offset the growth from that new annexed part of the city.
Yes, I think you've hit on an issue of assuming that none of those properties annex over the next 20 years, because you're right. If your property is in the urban growth area and adjacent to existing city limits, you can apply for annexation, and council will consider that request. Yeah, that's an open-ended question, is what happens if our planning assumptions say they won't annex, but council has one before them, what can they do? And if they can move forward with that annexation, what do we do? Does that affect other areas of the city? I don't have an answer for that.
Yeah, because it makes the math wrong, right? Yes. Now we have a capacity problem. We have too much fill in the blank, correct, residential jobs, et cetera. Yeah, I guess I'm not a fan of operating under assumptions that we're not going to accept an annexation request, especially, some of these properties, even right now, are surrounded by the city. Maybe not right up to their doorstep, but I don't think it's a fair assumption to make, I guess, is one way to say it. The flip side to that is we have property owners who are asking to be brought into the UGA, and I'm a big proponent of, if the property owners are interested in doing something, we better listen to what they're asking for. And reading the briefing material from the feasibility studies, most of these properties, or at least a huge percentage of them, are not ag anymore. Is that right?
In terms of current use, yes. There's definitely some nuance there of, current use versus potential use, which I'm not an expert in. But yes, the analyses we've received do show that, I'll use Area 1 as an example because I'm familiar with that report, do show that there is a lack of current ag uses on some of those parcels, as well as potential, as well as the area being surrounded on 3 sides by urban growth, which is sort of the line of argument we would expect to see for a lot of these properties.
Yeah, it feels like if we if we assume that we're going to reject future annexation, and I guess I'm assuming that people will request to be annexed at some point, but that's sort of how it works, right? Mom and dad pass away and the kids don't want to own the property, so they sell it. That's one side of it, right? That's option one, is we're just going to pretend like they're not going to want to annex. But option two is we have these property owners that want to be brought inside the UGA. Their property is not being used under how it's zoned currently, or at least part of the properties are not being used that way. But if we go with one option, we're kind of sticking it to the other group, right? I mean, if we go with one, we're not bringing in all the UGA. If we're going with option two, we're either lying to ourselves or we're going to stick it to the people who want to be annexed in the future.
Yeah, you could look at it that way. There's other parts of the equation too. I mean, if you hypothetically looked at a model where all of those expansion areas are included, and we do make an assumption that all or some of the properties in the UGA annex, then we're probably overshooting our numbers, and we would have to look at reductions elsewhere, which in terms of the variables we've looked at so far, that reduction elsewhere would be removing or limiting some of those mixed-use hubs.
Properties that are not brought into I can stop if you want. No? Okay. Properties that are not brought into the UGA, what's their future like? They're being brought in the UGA, they're not in the city limits, right? They're still county, but they're within our UGA. If they're not brought within our UGA, they're county property, obviously, or controlled by the county in that respect. But what happens to them? I mean, some of these properties, maybe they could be brought into another municipality's UGA?
No, these ones that are adjacent to Ridgefield, Ridgefield is their option to be brought into a UGA.
One way to think about that then would be they're stuck until the next time we're going through this process, so maybe in 10 years.
Yeah, their next opportunity to petition to be included in the UGA would be the next comprehensive plan.
Right, because to be brought in the UGA, it's every 10 year. They can't do it.
It is
whenever
every
they want.
10 year. I've asked county staff about out of cycle requests. They don't really happen. I would assume 10 years.
And is that by law? It's every 10 year? I mean, is it? Are they required to open the window every 10 years? I think you said earlier that the county has opened the window. Are they forced to open it? Or potentially could the county not open it in 10 years?
No, 10 years is the maximum. It used to be 8 years. In 2023, the legislature passed a bill increasing it to 10 years. So 10 years is the maximum. Theoretically, they could open it sooner. But my understanding is it wouldn't be opening just UGA expansion requests sooner. It would be doing a whole comprehensive plan update sooner.
Okay.
And I believe there is precedent for that occurring in Clark County.
Okay. I'm going to lose my voice, so I'm going to turn off my mic for now.
I'm just going to jump in to key off a couple things he said and then pass it down the line before I do anything else. One thing I just wanted to make sure that we're all on the same page for when it comes to annexation. If you are not in the UGA, requesting annexation from the city is not an option, correct?
That's correct. The two conditions to request annexation from the city are the property needs to be in the UGA and adjacent to existing city limits.
Gotcha. The other thing that I just really wanted to kind of emphasize more or request more clarification, and I fully understand this might need to be brought forth at another meeting, is that while I very much understand the spirit of trying to hit the target as accurately as possible, what I'm not understanding what the reality is of overshooting it. Like when I think about the combination of having some annexation that might or might not happen, but nonetheless that we're making assumptions on, or not assumptions on, and then also having some UGA changes that if unexpected annexations happen and seem acceptable, then while we did expand the UGA, that just means that we can, through multiple tools, but not necessarily throwing anything out of the UGA, control the way that development happens and density happens. I'm not really understanding the downside. I mean, obviously, the whole goal here is to be as thoughtful and smart, being driven very much not only by mandates coming from the state, but also from the public as to how we develop and grow within the city boundaries. But I'm not understanding this kind of knife edge reality. It seems, and I guess tied to that is wanting to know, is there any specific supporting data behind the assumption of those possible annexations? Are we in considering that an option because there has been at least preliminary discussion with those property owners, and while they have not signed up for anything, they've at least designated that they are amenable or have thinking of it, or are we just purely rolling the dice on that?
So to your second question first, and then I'll move back to the first one. Second map. Areas 6 and 5, we have seen, particularly in Area 5, which is the Carty Road sub-area, we have seen annexation requests come in already. Those two areas also have sub-area plans adopted, which sets the future zoning when properties in those areas do annex. And for example, the Carty Road sub-area, that sub-area plan, the direction was this is a low density area. So the zoning, future zoning there is residential low density 4, which is the lowest option for density within the city limits. G Creek Plateau Area 6 is kind of a mix of low density 4, low density 6, and low density 8 zoning for the most part there. The other annexation areas shown, the 7s, those being smaller areas have not been subject to similar sub-area plans, and we haven't, well, we've had a couple requests in those areas as well, not the concentration that we've seen, say, in the Carty Road sub-area, so a mix. And then your first question was more about the potential to overshoot our allocations, right? The simple reason we can't do that is because we are required by law to meet our allocations. So creating a plan that significantly would accommodate more growth than we're allocated would open the city up to legal action.
So to put it in other words, if we went with option one out of your current options and we both received annexation requests we weren't expecting and accepted those, then we would need to take action to offset that. That would involve actually deallocating urban growth area? Or would there be some other way that we would have to deal with that?
Potentially, yeah. Yeah.
Thanks.
So to piggyback off that last question, so option 1 is overshooting? No.
No, these options are both within a
Within our
small
target.
margin of error hitting our targets.
Okay.
It's not the only two ways to do it, but based on our analysis and assumptions and feedback we've received to date, these are two amenable options to do it. You can shuffle the elements around in different ways, but to answer your question, yes, both of these options would be on target.
Okay. So in option 2, areas 5, 6, and 2B. Those areas have been within the UGA for 20 years, is that correct?
That is correct.
And
Well, at least since the last planning cycle, which was 2016. I believe they've been in 2 cycles, though.
Yes, I believe so too.
Yes.
I just wanted you to clarify. Okay, so for 20 years, majority of those properties in 5, 6, 2B have not wanted to get annexed into the
Correct.
city. And it may be a while till those properties do want to get annexed into the city. So, you know, option 1 is kind of appeasing, you know, both groups. You know, properties that do want to get developed and properties that don't want to get developed. It's kind of allowing the properties that don't want to get developed to stay that way. And then I'm not a huge fan of the mixed use. I feel like it's a kind of a tricky thing to do. So I feel like if we have property owners, you know, in option 1, I feel like that's a better route to go.
Can you go back to the slides that show like the feedback from the surveys?
Absolutely.
Thank you.
So this one's feedback on option 1, and I can flip to the next one, which is option 2.
Well, I was just thinking about the comment made about like being able to access different neighborhoods, and option 1, alternative 2, sounds like it can accomplish that even based on the feedback that was submitted by community. And then you said like our growth has kind of plateaued.
It will plateau over this planning period.
Okay.
Yeah, we're still growing, and we will still grow. We're about 17,000 now, projected to grow to 27,000 over the next 20 years. So a much slower rate of growth over the next 20 years than over the past 8 years.
So considering that the growth has slowed, and considering that we still need to like think about like access to utilities and services, water, when I look at alternative 3, option 2, doesn't seem as feasible in the near future to meet those needs of utilities, services, if we expand too much. And I'm looking back at the feedback also where it says like the growth is too far on the east side, or it's kind of a mix, right? You have where people wanted the growth in the east side and some did not. But like you said, we are able to look at the UGA again in less than, or the maximum 10 years.
Yeah, I would expect it to be 10 years from when we started this process, which was 2023. So most likely 2033 would be the initiation of the next look.
And so when we're looking at areas 5 and 6 on the map, those are the low density 4, 6, and 8, you said?
Yep, Area 5, Carty Road sub-area, that's low density 4. Area 6, G Creek Plateau sub-area is 4, 6, and 8. And for the benefit of our audience, those numbers are units per acre.
And currently in Area 6, that's where, that's Bursinger Road, right, that connects?
That's correct.
Okay.
Correct. Bertsinger is just north of Area 6.
And so when we're thinking about the low density 4 and 6, like that's small, 2, like 1 lane road, not necessarily even sometimes hard to fit 2 vehicles there. So that would all be included, like the roads would have to be updated in order to accommodate the growth or the density of 4-6.
That's correct. If, if properties in that area were to first annex by petition to our city council, and then if once they were annexed, they were to submit a development proposal, part of that proposal would have to be infrastructure upgrades, including roads, to be brought up to city standards.
And option 2, alternative 3 would allow that, correct?
They
Would allow the annexation.
It is assuming that the annexations happen, yes.
That's all I have.
One thing I wanted to kind of bring to the fore again, for all of our benefits, especially the audience, is an option 2, the one where we have these different areas where we're making the assumption of annexation. I just wanted to emphasize that in that map for option 2, areas 6 and 5 contain a large number of existing or planned annexation requests already. So while there is a history of nothing happening there, the entire reason that the sub-area, the Carty Road sub-area plan process went into place was due, if I understood right, to a number of those annexation requests coming in and that process being halted because there was a desire to put more thought and process into how that area was being treated. But again, we do have those requests and we expect more of those requests as it currently stands. Is that correct?
Yeah, if you're looking at Area 5, we have processed a number of annexation requests. I can't speak to what others may come to us in the future. Yeah.
Ms. Luss, could you again compare the 2 maps? There are some areas where we are making the assumption they'll be added to the UGA in both maps. Is that correct?
Correct. Both of these maps include the UGA expansion request. So I'll flip back here. Option 1 includes all of the property owner UGA expansion requests submitted to Clark County through their process that are adjacent to Ridgefield's existing UGA. So Area 1, 8, 9, 10, and 3A. Option 2, 8, 2A.
Can you go back to the option 1? I just want to see, okay, 3A and 2A. My eyes are not as good as they should be. Okay, so option 1 and 3A carry over.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, the 2 UGA expansion requests that happen to be west of I-5 are the ones that carry over.
And those 2 have already applied for UGA expansion, or are there others?
So all
others.
of the UGA expansion requests submitted their formal request to Clark County.
Right.
Yes, and submitted site-specific reports analyzing current agricultural potential, potential future uses,
Yeah.
et cetera.
I wonder if someone from Johnson is here to talk about their reports.
I'm not sure about that.
Okay. That's it.
May I ask a couple more questions, just follow-ups? Real quick, so he already asked, there's a couple properties that have requested annexation. In the second option, annexation already in the UGA is removed. In the assumption in the first one where we're adding UGA or accepting the UGA and not annexation, as I understand it. Once the UGA is accepted, as I believe we've determined, that's in, right? Like, once it's accepted, like, say people wanted to annex, we can't back that off to kind of try to meet that middle, correct?
Under current legislation, I believe once properties are added to the UGA, they are in the UGA. I would have to do some more research to confirm that, and if there is any sort of dedesignation process.
I'm just trying to point out that that's final at that point, right? So whether they decide to annex or develop or anything like that, once it's UGA, if nothing happens with it, it's in. So it kind of corners us a little bit in one sense. But at the same time, with the versus keeping kind of towards the center, and it looks like in the one option, you know, we're using packages that aren't developed closer to the core, versus in the other option, we're kind of sprawling out a little bit more. From the state, we have legislation, we have the affordable housing program. The reason we're doing a lot of this is we have to plan for that housing. We don't have a choice. The houses have to go somewhere, whether we want it here as a city or not, correct?
That's correct. The exercise is, yes, we need to accommodate a certain number of people, houses, and jobs. Where does it make sense?
Correct. And so the last thing I just wanted to point out, so whether we sprawl out a little bit more, and is there an option where houses brought, or how do I want to say this? Properties brought into the UGA obviously count towards that growth.
Correct.
Correct.
Yep, it's the city and the city limits and the UGA is our planning area.
But there's some function of annexing and UGA that we can't really do both because of the amount of things that will entail, correct? Hence why there's two basically a plan kind of strongly leaning one way and a plan strongly leaning the other.
Yep, that appears to be a kind of a central trade-off so far with our analysis.
I guess where I'm getting at with that, so sprawling out, it's not an option of like saying, okay, we're going to sprawl out and we're going to be less dense necessarily just over more properties. It's just where we're locating those things, correct?
I mean, it's both, right? The more area you have, the more buildable area you have, the lower the density you'll, theoretically achieve as it builds out with the same number of houses. But I think what you're getting at is our responsibility is to accommodate a certain number of people, houses, and jobs, and that doesn't change. We are looking at where it's located.
Exactly. I feel like that's a good designation for people for everyone, us included, to understand, is that between these two options, we have to pick where these go. We do not have that choice, correct?
Well, your choice is where they go. The choice is, I understand your question, yeah. We have these allocations, and that is what we're working with.
Yeah, I meant that we have to pick somewhere to put these.
Correct.
We do not have a choice there. It's just where we're putting those. Okay, that's all I have. Thank you.
Chair. Yes.
A couple more questions. First is, in regards to the properties that are asking to be decertified for agricultural and included in the UGA, we've talked here about the option that both of those things happen so that those lands can be used in different ways. My question is, does the county have the ability to decertify them for agricultural, but to change them to residential zoning while remaining in the county?
That's a good question. So if they were to remain in the county, is there a process to change the use to a different county use? I am not sure. Something I can look into.
And another question is about the timing of these activities, so, and how any differences of opinion between the city and county are handled. So if for any of these parcels, we said that they should be decertified as agricultural, they should be in the UGA, but the county decides otherwise, how are those two decisions reconciled?
Our comprehensive plan update is required to be consistent with Clark counties. So if there is a conflict there later this year when the county selects a preferred alternative, we would have to go back and reconcile that and figure out, okay, if this growth can't happen in expansion areas, where inside the boundary does it happen? Or risk going forward with a preferred alternative that still includes those expansions and, risk appeal on that front.
Okay. And do these applications, can you remind us, do these applications include a request for particular zoning that is not agricultural, so particular residential densities?
Yes, when property owners submit these UGA expansion requests, they are asked to provide a request to as to what that zoning would be, and we have worked those requests into our assumptions on this map. So area 1 on this map, the request through the UGA expansion request would be to look at this as a mixed use area. 8 and 9, 8 residential, 9 a residential, mostly residential mixed use, as well as 10 mostly residential mixed use. 3A, that property owner is interested, have a little more detail on that one, just because it is a single owner, and they've been looking at it for quite a while. 3A in the south there, I know they are, they've expressed interest in if they came in doing some sort of senior housing on that site. So in our assumptions, we've sort of accounted for that in what zoning would allow that.
Okay, thanks. And a term that I haven't heard during this presentation, but existed in prior discussions regarding land use, were urban holding areas. Is that something that's currently done? Was that something, okay, so why would you do an urban holding area versus a UGA expansion?
So urban holding applies to areas that are already in the urban growth area but have not annexed into the city limits, and it's basically a hold on development until infrastructure is available to that site to support development. So when properties annex, they have that urban holding designation on them, and that doesn't come off with annexation. That would only come off with like a future development proposal or city capital project that provides services to the site.
All right, and a question that's related to this topic, but perhaps isn't directly related. So I've expressed in the past my interest to plan towards the perhaps a mixed-use node in the southern part of the city to connect with any future southern freeway exit from the Battleground interchange. And is there any way during this process to plan for that, to make some note of that?
Yeah, so as part of the overall comprehensive plan update process, our engineering team is updating their capital facilities plans concurrently, including their transportation system plan, and looking at options for a future connection to South 219th, future southern connection to I-5 is part of their calculus on their transportation plan.
So once that's done, then in a future activity, perhaps in 10 years, then we would look perhaps at, so how does a UGA expansion happen if it's not at the request of the owners? Does the county have any ability to do that, or is it completely at the landowner's discretion?
It's owner initiated.
Okay. Thank you.
If it's all right with Planning Commission, I would suggest this might be a time to move into the public hearing, just because I know we have a lot of folks here who have been sitting for a while, and then return to any additional questions after that.
Yep. I just wanted to make one final comment, and we'll jump into the period. And I just feel after all the discussion, it's really important to emphasize the fact that between both these plans, the main risk is in two directions. And with the plan option 1, the risk is that the extra UGA expansions will not ultimately be approved, which is not completely in our hands. So that's the risk there in meeting our numbers. The risk in option 2 is that our assumptions on the level of annexation that actually happens and is counted into our numbers does not happen. So I just wanted to kind of make sure that in both cases, there's two very different levels of risk, but that is a big part of it. We have a goal to try and hit, and we have risk that we're trying to hit. So we're going to go ahead and move into our public hearing. It is now time for a public hearing. If you have signed up with the clerk prior to the meeting to address the Plan Commission, your name will be called, and the clerk will send you permission to unmute your microphone or come forward to the podium to make your comments. If you have not provided notice in advance to speak during the public hearing, please use raise hand feature during the public hearing if you wish to make a comment. The clerk will send you permission to unmute your microphone so you are able to make your comments. For the controls over the phone, press *9 for raise hand and press *6 to mute, unmute. Please state your name and limit your comments to 3 minutes, and there will be no back and forth with the staff or the commission, but we listen for your comments. Public hearing is now open. Do we have anybody either online or here in the audience that would like to come and speak? Go ahead and come up to the podium.
Thanks for the opportunity to address you. I'm Denny Houle. I live at the end of South 15th Street. Actually at the end of the very end of the street, which is in, we call it the donut hole, but the unincorporated hole in the middle of Ridgefield. And I've lived there for a while. I've lived in Ridgefield for longer. And my observation and my recommendation, or at least I encourage you to consider option 2. And the reason I do that is because the amount of development that is happening in that area, some of it very appropriate, and the infrastructure is going in, and that's really desired and valuable. However, the ridge development affects us greatly. And when I say option 2, what I like about that is that it makes development more compact. It allows for efficient services by the city. It doesn't extend services farther. It actually is growing from within. And say, for instance, the ridge development and then getting to Royal is something that long-term I would really like to see curb, gutters, streetlights, et cetera, et cetera. I think eventually, in the 20 years, our 15th Street extension, which is on a curve there, as you know, probably will be developed much the way 15th is going now. I really strongly encourage extending, I think it's 35th over to where it would hit Pioneer. I live on G Creek, and so it would extend where you turn from 15th north. That road is proposed to be developed in part by some of the funding from the Ridge development. And so what I like about Alternative 2 is that it's more compact and allows for better development of existing resources getting from parts in our city. I think Royal Road's a really good example of that. Thank you.
Please come forward. Thank you.
Good evening, Commission. Appropriate for me to go next because I also live in the donut hole on 15th Street. My name's Leanne Bremer. I'm with Miller Nash, and I represent Gerald and Beverly Jones. We've submitted materials into the record. I hope you had a chance to review them. So we are here Mr. Jones is here with me tonight. We're here in support of option 1. Their property is designated 8 on your map. And it is a UGA expansion and request, and just answer a couple of questions that came up during your discussion. There actually is the ability to retract urban growth boundaries. The Battleground is doing it this round. They've decided that there's one area that shouldn't be in their urban growth boundary, so they're going to bring it back out. But the other thing I wanted to say is that the county does make the final decision on urban growth boundary expansions, but in cooperation with the city, we value your input. We know that your recommendation will be carried forward and considered. So we ask you to consider including the Jones property in the urban growth area. We submitted a lot of material into the record on why it is not appropriate as ag. It's about 44 acres. It's right up against the city limits now. It's across the street from a school site. The Jones actually sold the property to the school district. There's 2 requirements in the Growth Management Act for ag lands. Whether the land's capable for agricultural production or if it has long-term commercial significance. So I'm not going to stand here today and say it's not capable for agricultural production because over the years it has been used for ag, but it certainly is not viable use, especially today. Mr. Jones had submitted a lot of evidence into the record on that long-term it has no commercial significance for ag. In fact, he only farms a portion of the property today and certainly doesn't make any money from it. But utilities are available to serve the site, meets other criteria for designation. Once land is designated ag, it is not supposed to stay that way forever if it doesn't meet the criteria. The Growth Management Act requires the county to reevaluate these lands and see if they're appropriate and they meet the definitions in the Act. So I respectfully request that you adopt or recommend option 1. Thank you.
Do we have anyone else online? Please come forward.
If I can get my legs to move here. I appreciate the opportunity to speak tonight and to be here. Excuse me. My wife and I, we bought our farm 35 years ago, and we moved here at the time that particular piece of land and other land around it, excuse me, it was at that time being studied by the state to be a backup airport. So the owner that we bought it from had research material like that. And the plan was if it was to go into an airport, the state would take it over through eminent domain. So we made an offer, and I expected the offer to come back about 50,000 more. They accepted it. And the realtor called us and said, hey, you got a farm. And we go, now what do we do? But it had a nice home on it. The home was 82 years old. After about 6 months, the state or the government decided not to put it into an airport. So that farm was used previously for pole beans, and that went out of style. When we moved here, we heard about the Spudders and U-Haul. They're gone. We started buying dairy calves and raising them until had a first calf. Now the dairies are gone. So I'd like to see, and I do appreciate the horse folks, because I've talked to two farmers. I'm losing my voice. I've talked to two farmers saying, if you were going to go into farming, what would you go into? And they both hesitate and hay farming. There's no money in hay farming. I got an estimate from Clark County on the cost of equipment, which I don't have, 130-something thousand. So I asked one farmer said, I'm retiring, there's no money, hay farmer. Another one said, if I had the fertilizer and the chemicals, I can't get my money back for 2 to 3 years. So I said, what if we pay for that and just share it to keep the thistle down? So that's where we are, you know. And I'd like to see, I hate to see the development where these people have no garage. And if you're following it like a garbage truck in or out or a school bus, there's not enough room to get around it. So I don't like what the state is doing. I think it's really sad. So thank you.
Anyone else wishes to comment? Please come on up.
All right, so while you guys were debating, I just wanted to remind, I was at one of the city council meetings, and in option 2, Ms. Butler said something about roads, if you were gonna grow area 4 and 6. And in a previous council meeting, there are potential plans. It's one of the last 2 options to make Bertzinger a major through street. It's the, what do they call it, 35th Street expansion or extension. And that would make it, it's the red option, the roundabout down at Reman, allowing that to go from Reman up to 51st to be another major artery for the city. That was brought up by the mayor, Mayor Onslow. So I think that that concern wouldn't be a concern with what they're planning on doing. It's down to the last 2, the red option, I don't remember the other one. But that would problem solve for option 2, areas 4 and 6. Because I know they said eventually they'd like the city to have 289th, because Reman turns into 51st and goes to 289th, to be access to I-5, so another major artery for the city. My concern with option 1 is the private property owners of the areas of 8, 9, and 10. They're the neighbors that don't want to be annexed in. Are they going to be notified that they're going to be surrounded by development, some of it high density, a lot of them probably with those tiny one-car garages? Specifically, area 10, I think it's called Spring Estates, there's some really nice expensive homes there. Are those people being notified of what's going to be happening? Because their house value is going to be devalued greatly, and probably force them to request to be in the UGA in 8 to 10 years. It kind of seems like maybe that's what the plan is, to kind of force them to jump on board by building all these developments around them. I don't see how that's appropriate. I am not a fan of the option where you use areas 8, 9, and 10. Sorry. I would think that the other option where it's more compact makes more sense, because those of us that live in rural areas are actually sad to see the sprawl. We'd rather see it more combined into one area.
Do we have any additional comments? Yes, please come forward.
And can I remind our speakers to state your name at the start for the record, please? I did note down the last 2.
All right. Lisa Fix, do you want the address again, or just the name?
Just your name.
All right. So I wouldn't limit yourself. You look like very intelligent people. I'm excited for you. I wouldn't limit yourself to option 1 or 2. I think there's a combination somewhere in between to try to make this this work for meeting the state requirements, meeting the development requirements and the growth requirements. I do think that there's some considerations. I'm more of a fan, if you had to pick one or the other, of option 2. I believe what you were talking about, creating these areas where you have large developments next to people who are ag. And I wouldn't assume somebody who's not using their ag property currently, that they wouldn't use it, they couldn't use it, or they don't use it. You don't know why, unless you've actually asked. So there's people that, they may not have been able to fertilize their property, might have been too wet. They may have had various reasons, health conditions. So just because it's not today being used doesn't mean it wouldn't be used by somebody else. The other thing with, if you look at Clark County, they have a scenic route, right? It goes all the way through Clark County, and I see so many people on bikes going by my property. I would assume they're stopping in my driveway to look at my horses. And I don't doubt that they would not, I kind of doubt they'd stop to go look at a house or a subdivision or anything else. And the other part is there's plenty of us that are in the rural area that I can tell you myself, I have spent hundreds of thousands of dollars to improve my property. And I had a barn burned down to the ground, and I have a 106-year-old house that is absolutely beautiful. And it is probably historic. To me, it's beautiful. Might be, nobody else probably wants it, but I love it. And it is a very, very beautiful piece of our culture and our history that should be important. Anyway, I don't think you should limit yourself to both. I don't think it's necessary. I think there's something good that could happen with all of it. Avoid creating these holes of egg mixed with, maybe, if you get them, if you don't know anything about agriculture, it doesn't always mix well with a lot of people. Like, it's better at a distance. Animals don't always like everybody shooting rocks at them and bikes riding by. But anyway, just think about it. It's why we're here. A lot of us live here and wanted to be here, and I'm always getting the buzzer. Okay, thank you, and I appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you. Looks like we have a hand online.
Hi. Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Go ahead.
Oh, okay. Hi, my name is Jeanette, and I'm at 4348 South 11th Way in Ridgefield in the Clover Hill development. The location is near Pioneer and Royal Road South, and I wanted to speak to, I like option 1, alternative 2, because it's good. The other option really increases the traffic in our area, and you are all trying to put a lot of density into this area, and it's already kind of gone crazy. We have Discovery Ridge and Pioneer Village, which all the buildings aren't filled up yet, so there's going to be more traffic there. We have the new Paradise Point, 180 acres of homes. North Royal Ridge mixed-use overlay that's going to have apartments and gas stations and such. We have South Royal Legacy Trails expansion. They're going to bring those apartments down a bit more on South Ridgefield. We have Clover Hill 5. It's going to be a future phase here coming by Evergreen Homes. It's going to have 466 homes. We have new Quill Homes coming in on 15th Way that goes up to the donut hole. And at the top of the donut hole, we have Lennar Homes. So opening up that sub-area, Gee Creek area for more homes is a lot of traffic down here. I mean, I have a hard time getting out of my development now with the school bus schedules and the working schedules. It just gets crowded, and it's still basically a 2-lane road there. So another impact besides the traffic is we're going to have a lot of loss of trees up there. It is a beautiful little mountaintop up in the donut hole or along 15th. Beautiful rolling hills, a lot of wildlife, a lot of trees, and it's going to go away. I think we should sprawl out a little bit, spread the love everywhere so we can spread out the traffic, make it better for the wildlife, and keep the trees. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you. Go ahead and come forward.
Good evening. My name is Amber Baker. I'm just going to state up front that this is my personal opinion. I also happen to be part of our elected school board locally, but I'm not here representing that entity in any capacity. So just want to thank you all for the opportunity to speak this evening regarding your land use alternatives that are being discussed. I'm a 14-year resident of the Donut Hole area of Ridgefield that's been rebranded the G Creek Plateau. And I wanted to just share my concerns about annexation in that area as reflected on the map that was Alternative 3, now Option 2, Area 6 that's been discussed. Before coming here tonight, I wasn't clear on whether or not that map represented an automatic annexation of the entire area or an assumption that we would plan to annex our properties as individual owners through a petition process. So thank you for clarifying that. I heard very clearly that you are referring to a petition process for annexation and just claiming the density as part of the growth plan, since you do have to demonstrate that you have additional capacity included. I want to also just say that when we moved here, we were like some other folks who have spoken already. We moved to a rural farming community. There was no Clover Hill, there was no Seven Wells, there was no roundabout in Ridgefield at the time. I empathize absolutely with anyone who is on the outskirts of the city wanting to limit the expansion of the growth. I recognize that as a agricultural business located one property away now from a subdivision. It is hard to farm and make a living as a farmer, and it is hard to do that in the middle of a city. There are some benefits. We have some lovely neighbors and customers that we're able to serve, but it is a challenge to be an agricultural business in the middle of a city. I hope that as you reflect on what is going to happen with our plan, that there's a recognition that there is a need for open space even within urban areas. I have lived in other cities that wished that they had preserved open space and farmable land within their city because it's hard to get that back once the houses are there. So I just want to ask from you all and from the city, and I'll ask the city directly as well, for assurance that there won't be an automatic annexation of the Area 6. I know that it is legally possible because we're surrounded by the city limits. I see my time. So I just want to ask as much as possible for that assurance that this is not reflecting an automatic annexation of our area. And I just want to share this note from my daughter, because she made a note for you. And she's at gymnastics, so I said I would show it to you. Thanks.
Do we have anyone else that wants to make a comment in this public hearing? Please come forward. Thank you.
Good evening. I'm Cheryl Mitchell and happen to be her neighbor. And I've lived here in the Donut Hole for about 40 years now, and there was nothing on our property except the septic tank and a well when we moved in there. And we put a manufactured home. I had horses there. We built the barn. We put anything that's there. We did it, and it's been a lovely area all up until about the last 10 years or so, with looking to the east. I mean, I've had a view of Mount Hood, which I've enjoyed all this time, and so far I still have it. But the Royal property has been developed, and a lot of people have moved in there, and currently the property between the Royal property and mine is under being totally dug up, and it's somewhere in the neighborhood of $43 million homes are going to be placed on that property. And first I'm wondering what the heck's that going to do to my taxes, and I used to say have horses, I don't now, I got old. And but it's like I still enjoy the area, you know, it's pretty, and even though I'm not having livestock at this time, I hate to see all this development so much. A little bit's fine, but I think it's really gotten out of hand, and I don't know what the answer is to slow some of this down, but I don't want to be considered part of the city. I don't know if I'm going to have to get drug into it. And like I used to see 2 cars an hour go past our place. Now I can't even go for a walk because of the big trucks going by that are, you know, doing more development further down the road. And I put in a vote too to put 35th Street through, I think, because I don't know how else. Otherwise, everybody's coming past our place like they are now. And hopefully to get 35th to go out to Pioneer, if that's doable. I don't know what's between, you know, that right in there, but it's dangerous now to try to walk. But we need to keep, it's been so beautiful out there, and we're losing that with as much development is going on right now. And so I'm hoping too. I don't really want to be considered in the city, so I'm hoping we can do something to keep something of what the past was still available. And I know downtown is still kind of the way it was, and I hope we don't change that too much with all the other new stuff going on, you know, around Rose Hours, all those other stores. So anyway, just my comments. Thanks.
Anyone else that wants to make any comments in this public hearing period, please come forward.
Janice Van Wyhe. This is when I wanted to talk, not at the beginning, the way your agenda said. It's confusing. Back to the equestrian thing. I like the idea of a little flexibility in the options of allowing ag, small garden farm type farms in town. I like the idea, and I offer that you consider the idea of keeping the stables as those sort of ag insets inside the city. I've done land use planning on large federal projects. I know I don't want to hear, she doesn't want to hear, oh, let's do another alternative that's a mix of 1 and 2. Been there, done that, and it's a bummer. But it could be done with all due respect to the hardest working people in this room, which is the land use planners. I agree, we need flexibility. People love to have that little bit of nature inside town. I'm not going to use up my time. You already know what my opinion is. Keep the stables, every one of them, because those people want to ride their bike to the stable, get on their horse, and go around the arena or whatever they do. Or take the trailer and go to wherever. Thank you.
Anyone else that wants to approach for this public hearing? Go ahead and come forward.
Hi there. My name's Kelly Graham, and I live on Northwest 280th Street. And I am favoring option 1 only because option 2 has some faulty numbers, I believe, that you're considering for annexation. Part of the properties listed on our road of Northwest 280th, we have a brand new house that was just built earlier this year, and I'm pretty sure they don't want to annex and become R12 residential density. So I think just looking at each area that you're annexing and really making sure those numbers are going to be feasible, because I know out of the 8 properties in that area that are under consideration, probably 2 of them would vote for annexation, but the others aren't going to. So that's going to skew some of your numbers. And I think just making sure you consider people love the open space of Ridgefield, but they do want some walkable areas, and just kind of considering everything as you go through the planning. I know it's not an easy decision, so I appreciate all your work. Thank you.
Any additional comments for this public hearing? Last chance to speak at the public hearing. Oh, here we go. Please come forward. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Dennis Evans, and I must say I have a vested interest in keeping the donut hole, because we moved here specifically for that, to be next to our daughter and her farm, and to bring our herd of horses up from the dreaded state of California. As people have talked about, it's remarkable to me to see all the, I call them local tourists from the developments, coming down to recreate along our road. There is a limit to how much can be accommodated there. When I try to get my rig, I have a large horse trailer to get our horses out to go places, and it's a little scary just because the configuration of the road, we're just 2 lanes, and the big truck and the trailer, and the horses are jumping around the back. I just say that preserving what I think is a gem in this city is something to be kept in mind, not to be frittered away. I came up from Monterey County, one of the most beautiful places on the planet, and as Amber said, it was all ag when I moved there 50, 60 years ago, and once it's gone, it's gone. You're not going to ever get it back. And again, I just would highly recommend you preserve the gem.
Any additional comments for this public hearing? Anybody online? Last chance for comment in this public hearing. All right, I'm closing the public hearing. Going to go ahead and open it up for more questions and comments from the commission. We'll go ahead and start down on this end this time.
Turn on my mic, sorry. Wanted to share or say thank you. I appreciate the feedback and appreciate you guys being here and letting us know what you like. Ms. Sherilyn, I appreciate that you said you want to keep the past what it was. I think that is very true and very accurate. I think many people here want to preserve the open space and also just the beautiful landscape that Ridgefield has. To that, I also understand that we have, the need to accommodate growth and affordable or housing. So I guess I'm stuck with, what option do we go with? And how you shared, is there a compromise that we can come to? And I don't think that we'll find that answer tonight, but I'm curious to hear what other commissioners have to share.
I don't believe I have anything further for Claire or Miss Lust. I have received everyone's comments. I appreciate that. There's a lot of mixed comments, so it's a lot to go over. So it's hard to make a compromise, but we'll definitely consider all your comments. Thank you.
Okay. The first thing I want to get clarification on, and I apologize if I'm pretty sure this was made clear, and I'm just trying to make sure I don't have any doubts. For the donut hole area, do we actually have a full sub-area plan for that, or is that not something that's in place?
Yeah, council adopted a sub-area plan for the donut hole. People have told me not to call it the donut hole, but since you guys are, I will. Council adopted a sub-area plan for that whole area in 2017, I believe.
I guess the reason I bring that up is that I'm not intimately familiar with the area, but I definitely am familiar with it. I've been to Amber's farm multiple times and have walked through the area, and certainly appreciate both sides of this general concept of the general marching orders of urban growth and how you're creating density within a small area, with one of the primary outcomes to not be going out into large urban sprawl way out in the middle of nowhere, and that is part of the idea. And yet at the same time, I greatly appreciate some of the details about that area. There obviously is a plan in place, but I don't know any details about that personally, and I guess that's part of my concern, is I do feel that a well thought out plan for that area could both allow for some development and yet address some of these issues. Like, I think the last thing that should happen is that limits are put in place that would get in the way of continued agriculture. But again, I don't know the details. I guess the best that I would say is passing on a comment to the council that even though that plan exists, that there is enough of ongoing discussion and concern about that area that in continuing to look at opening that up or counting on possible annexation from that area, that it might even be worth looking at revising that plan if there is consistent concern and issues with any of the particularities in that plan. The next thing I was curious about is, well, let me back up. I should stay in the same vein. So part of that is about trying to understand what would happen or could happen with regard to annexation. I would also comment that while it's undeniable that in the first plan that 3 of the significant areas for inclusion are not only on the east side but kind of farther out. I would point out that in pretty much all of the cases, I wouldn't really consider them extreme sprawl. Again, I'm just providing a light comment, not based on a lot of personal experience there, but the idea of there being a development across from a future school actually sounds like it could be a positive impact. It doesn't mean that I would consider that something that needs to happen. I'm also actually familiar with the area a little bit that's in the far southeast, that's right adjacent to an industrial area, and whether that possibly became a bit more of an industrial and or residential. I don't see it as an extreme amount of sprawl, and I definitely consider that I guess what I would ask the council to do in light of this is kind of offsetting further understanding about what might or might not happen with annexation. There have been a few different points made here along those lines. Also concern about that central area, that plateau, G Creek Plateau, and really trying to make sure that we don't lose an opportunity to both meet our needs, not ignore annexation requests completely from residents, and yet once, again, as many people have pointed out, once we take certain steps, we cannot really back them up. And also to pretty much on an individual basis, take a final look at those requests on the east side to see what might make sense. I guess at the end of the day, what I'm saying is I really am not fully behind either one of these 2 plans. If I had to lean towards one, the majority of what's in option 2 makes sense to me. It's really all about the annexation prediction versus the request for addition into the urban growth area and trying to really do a little bit more homework there. So I guess that's really where I'm coming from. Thanks.
I guess just to start from an area where I think a lot of us agree, and that is that it's okay to call it the donut hole. Is that right?
I would say based on our comments tonight, yeah.
Okay.
Sounds like it.
Is there any consensus on if it's G Creek or Gee Creek? Does anybody actually know?
G Creek.
G, like the letter G.
Like the letter G.
Okay. In this room, we'll call it G Creek then, but I guarantee in the parking lot they're calling it something different. I don't know that, I think Vice Chair Ammerman is right. I don't think there's a consensus on one plan or the other, which has been pointed out by several members of the public. I think one big question I have is how much control, and the answer is none, I think, how much control does the city have over zoning of areas that are not in the UGA?
None.
And how much control does the city have of areas that are in the UGA, not in the city limits?
In the UGA, not in the city limits, are still in Clark County jurisdiction. They're part of our planning area because once you're in the UGA, you are eligible for annexation. So we kind of have to think ahead and say, okay, if this annexed, what would the zoning be? But while it's still in the UGA, Clark County controls.
Okay, so and like I said, I don't think we're going to have a consensus recommendation of anything. So I would just say when it comes time to talk to the city council, one thing that I'm constantly concerned with is zoning, specifically what is next to everything. I don't think that the property that's, I think it's across the street from the elementary school property, I don't think the county is going to approve that area to be like a tire burning factory or a toxic waste dump or anything. But I don't want to see the city lose control of certain ways to limit what kind of bad development there could be. Bad meaning not healthy, not good for the community, ugly, that kind of stuff. I'm not sure that there's a way to do that for properties that are not part of the city, but we certainly are closer, I would say, to having some influence if they're within the UGA.
Correct.
So I guess without saying this property or that property, I would say the city, I would hope the city council strongly considers, what potentially could be put in certain properties, whatever development could be there. I joke about the tire burning factory, but my parents live in Houston, and there is actually a tire burning factory right across the street from an elementary school there because they have zero zoning. So, they have no zoning laws there. It's tremendous. I highly recommend you don't go there. Okay. It's long been my preference, when possible, to have dense housing development under an assumption that is probably mostly false, but an assumption that dense housing development is lower cost, and we have a massive housing, expensive housing problem here. So I always tend to start off leaning in that direction, but I don't know. I don't know that my assumption's correct. And also, I'm concerned with operating under what I think for sure is a false sense of we are not going to annex this property, right? That those assumptions that we're not going to be annexing those in the future. So when the city is, whatever report you're able to give to the city council, I would like to see some sort of projection of what if option one or some variance of option one is the preferred option for the city council. Operate under the assumption that what if maybe 25 or 50% or maybe even 100% of the properties we're going to pretend are not going to annex, what if they do annex? And then what would the potential trade-offs be in other parts of the city in order to make the capacity numbers match? No city council has to follow what a previous city council has done or said, but I want the city council to know if that is a very complicated thing. And I don't think there's a way to know what percentage of those properties will annex in the future, but looking over the next, say, 20 years, I think it would be a fair assumption to say that some percentage, probably a significant percentage, is going to move in that direction if they are allowed, if they ask for it, and if they're allowed. And the city would have to make a trade-off at that point. So I think it would benefit the city council to see some sort of projections and figure out how challenging it would be to make those trade-offs at some other point. And that's all. Thank you.
Okay, it's a lot to unpack. We have, I want to thank everyone in the audience for, voicing your thoughts and opinions, and I don't take them lightly. I don't think any of us do. Obviously, we have a not easy decision, in the city to go forward, being one of the, 7 or 8 incorporated cities in Clark County? Is it 7? Anyone know off the top of their head? Anyways, regardless, living in or around those 7 incorporated cities, we have rules that or however many incorporated cities, we have rules that the other areas don't. Correct me if I'm wrong, Ms. Lust?
Yes, cities have different responsibilities for growth than unincorporated county.
And unfortunately for everyone living in the city, anytime you have a lot of people together, nobody's going to agree. I think we all agree on that. I mean, we heard that tonight, even just between the 2 plans here. I think looking at the 2 plans, and considering the housing benefit district kind of idea of, having higher density housing closer towards, schooling and public transit and, the necessities to help low-income people be able to access the things they need most more quickly. But at the same time, considering letting people choose choose their destiny as opposed to making assumptions on what people will choose as their destiny. I personally lean towards, I want to get this right because it's, alternative 2, allowing the people in the UGA district, or that want to be part of the UGA district to choose their own destiny, because as we've heard, there's people in the annex assumption areas that don't want to do that. And I don't think, as an engineer, I have to do risk assessment, and my red flag is kind of waving that risk assessment. We've heard multiple people in this planned area who said that they don't want to be part of that. So I'm already thinking we'll have to realign. So my thoughts, and I thank everyone for their thoughts today, is leaning towards like 80% of option 1 with a re-evaluation of people who have voiced their want to annex, and taking those into consideration, a little bit more strong consideration to that. I think it's important that we think about infrastructure like the public services like police and fire and all that stuff. Sprawling out spreads those thinner, may require more, as well as spreading out. Utilities are going to be more expensive, having them further out. Water utility is much more expensive the further out you have to get from pumping stations, sewage stations, et cetera. But it also falls on the people. So my personal belief, and what I would stress that we push forward, is the idea of taking more of option 1, but needing an option 3 that takes better consideration of annexing and not completely kind of pushing it aside. Thank you.
I very much appreciate those that took your time this evening to come out and listen to us and to share your viewpoints. And I appreciate all the effort that city staff has made with others in the community who have participated over this last many months. I think the City Council really looks to the Planning Commission to provide a recommendation where possible. And when the time is right today, we'll make a motion. And I prefer option 2, and with the general belief that we should contain growth within a defined area, and I think that certainly with the understanding of practices of the city that we don't force people to annex, so that alleviates, in my mind, concerns regarding people being forced into the city. But I think in regards to the overall planning process, et cetera, I do prefer option 2. And that's my comment. But again, when it comes time for motions, I'll be ready. Thanks.
I wanted to add a couple things. First, It's for very obvious and understandable reasons. Our focus has been very much drawn into trade-offs and discussion around the parcels predicted to annex, and very separate from that, the parcels that have requested redesignation and inclusion in the urban growth area. One thing that I would kind of like to get clarification, Ms. Lust, is my understanding, and I have not done enough homework to have a very clear understanding here, but between the two plans, and again, I will try and stick my reference to the option verbiage, that option 2, which is also alternative 3, that in general, separate from those points, the annexation and the UGA, that in general it represents more density within the primary built-up area of Ridgefield. Would you say that's true?
That's correct. The option with the higher number, option 2, alternative 3, does represent more, I'm so sorry, does represent an allocation of more growth within the existing boundary.
And one kind of opinion, again, my kind of take on things I did want to throw out there is I'm very sensitive to all of this for so many different reasons. I'm from an island in Alaska that's never had a population above 8,000 or 9,000, surrounded by endless wilderness, more than most people can conceive of. And yet at the same time, I've been disturbed as I've traveled across the country with just wanton urban sprawl, where I've even seen cities abandoned as people have gone kind of out into the middle of nowhere and built a big shopping mall and a bunch of developments around it with no other ultimate goal than to make money. So that's part of what this is all about, but still the devil's in the details. Some of the reasons that I'm very much a fan of the primary focus being option 2 or alternative 3 is due to things like the mixed-use areas and whatnot. I feel pretty strongly that having areas where you have a combination of walking capability to both residential, business, and services, and less emphasis on driving across town is a very healthy thing from a community, especially from a standpoint of fostering the actual feel of community and fostering healthy density. And I feel that that's represented better in that second option or alternative 3. And I will again be clear, I'm personally not ready to make a formal recommendation to the council as far as one over the other, but I would be mainly for option 2 being the foundation to work from as they entertain some of these other things, specifically the annexation, the donut hole, for lack of a better term, and then again, the areas requesting inclusion. And that's all I have. There is one other topic I keep forgetting. A lot of people have brought up comments about stables and equestrian, and I have to admit that I'm a huge fan. I have many friends that are involved in that community in the Ridgefield area, and yet still don't know that much. And my concern, or my question and kind of concern is, what of these different decisions would have any substantive impact on the operation of or access to stables and equestrian facilities? It's not clear to me how that plays into this. Is there anything you can enlighten?
Sure. So, not knowing, the folks that spoke about specific facilities and stables, not knowing exactly where those are located, I guess I can speak more generally, which is that, as has been mentioned a few times in this meeting, a property with a use on it, like a stable or equestrian center, any change to that is up to the property owner. So in terms of impacts, it would be more about what neighboring properties are permitted to do, and that does change if those neighboring properties are or are not in the UGA, or the next step annexed into the city. So in terms of individual property owners on their own property with those uses, the future of what they do on their own property is up to them. But what their neighbors do, that's potentially, there are different impacts from different options. Again, I'm not having like a specific parcel in mind. I don't think I can provide a more specific answer than that.
I will just speak to the two I'm familiar with and not very familiar with. The alternative 3, which both alternatives or both options include that parcel that's adjacent to I-5, but at the far north end of the city. It's actually directly north of my development. And there is a well-known stable up there, but it's outside of that, if I understand correctly. It's like an entire road and chunk of land north of that entire addition. Does that sound correct?
I would have to confirm, but that does sound correct. The facility I am thinking of north of the city is farther north than the requested UGA expansion area.
But the other one I'm familiar with is actually either part of, I believe it is part of the southeast parcel requesting inclusion, that there's a stable there that I drive by quite often going to some friend's house. And so I guess in the context of that property, they made it clear in their report that they plan to maintain that facility, and they had no plans otherwise. But if they were to become part of the urban growth boundary, my assumption is that that would pave the path. Again, no guarantees at all, but it certainly could make it easier for a future owner of the property or even the existing owner to, through annexation and further things, to take that property out of the equestrian field and make it into a development, correct?
Correct.
That's all I have. Do we have any other questions or comments from the commission? Do we have any motions at this time?
I make a motion that we recommend to City Council that they adopt for further consideration option 2.
Do we have a second on that motion, or more discussion on that? I guess I would ask for clarification on what you mean by with other considerations, because I think that I'm not sure I'm ready to vote on something in the positive, but if there's enough clarification on that additional.
So my motion would be that they focus any future discussion with the option 2 as the basis. So as we, and for elaboration, so I think that as the staff reported, as the discussions on this have gone from an earlier option 1, which let's call it option 0, and it went to an alternative. Council then asked for that to be tweaked and to come up with what is now option 2. And I'm saying to provide some focus for council and for staff on future examinations into this topic, given that I believe that there's a timeline we have to kind of march to, and being in alignment with county. And I think we can understand that neither option are perfect. No solution's perfect, but I think that we should at least focus that in one direction or another. I think it's our job to provide to the council that focus, that recommendation of focus, rather than doing nothing, and then they are going to be faced with this same topic and have no clarity about at least a pointer of where we believe they should go.
I completely agree with you. My only concern is not leaving it open-ended. I guess my recommendation would be along the lines of focus on option 2, but ensure that they review both annexation assumptions and the individual requests for inclusion in the urban growth area in coming up with a final plan. as well as the donut hole. But just saying option 2 is what we prefer, I'm concerned that that doesn't provide strong enough message. But it's your motion.
Yeah,
we're
right,
just
right. So
discussing,
I guess I'll try to, again, my recommendation to City Council, in looking at the 2045 plan, use as the basis of their consideration option 2, taking into account comments from citizens that have testified as well as commissioner discussions.
Second on that motion? I will second that motion. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed?
Nay.
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 There we go. The motion does not pass. We're going to open up for a, do we have any further discussion on any other motions or any other?
Just a question for Ms. Lust. You normally take lots of notes when we're discussing things, whether or not a motion passes or not. Can you confirm if you've taken a lot of notes based on what you've heard this evening?
Yeah, I've taken a lot of notes. I can confirm that. Also, everything in this meeting is on the record, and we'll have an audio recording. And I do suffer through the sound of my own voice to listen to those before I take anything to council.
I don't know that we need to pass a motion or recommendation. I think Ms. Lust has quite a few notes written down. I do agree with Commissioner Wolf that it is helpful and sometimes our job to provide guidance to the City Council that is more specific than I think what we're doing this evening. But my no vote was because I think it's the differences between option 1 and option 2 are dramatic, and I don't think that, well, I know for certain I'm not ready to say I lean one way or the other, and so that's why I voted no. So I take your point. I think you're absolutely right. When possible, we should provide guidance to the City Council. I just don't feel like I can do that between these two options.
In regards to what I previously said about preferring option 1 with consider, a different option that's more heavily aligned to letting people make the decisions on their own property to some extent, obviously being in the urban growth area doesn't necessarily mean that the county can't zone their stuff differently. Would it be appropriate to request that they look in that further?
Yeah, staff can take that direction.
I mean, that would be my suggestion, is to looking into doing a hybrid that is not, as Commissioner Flynn pointed out, so extreme, but does give some people the options to do the things that they want to do with their properties at the end of the day. Unfortunately, I don't think it's fair to let some people decide what other people do with their properties just because they like their property. I hate to say it like that. I don't mean that in a negative way. I wish we all could have what we want, but it also is not cool to tell somebody, hey, you can't do this because of what I want. So I have to say I would like to give an option that gives people a little bit more flexibility to do with what they want with their own property. That's all.
Any other comments or discussion? Motions?
Ms. Lust, are we, I guess, up against deadlines? Are we needing to make a recommendation now? Can we have another month? I guess, what does that look like?
No, you don't need to make a recommendation now. I can certainly look at, if the request is to actually bring this back to you next month, I can look at that option with our overall project schedule. Right now, I have this scheduled to go to council next week, so I'd have to look at how that shuffles our overall schedule. But if that is a request from Planning Commission, I will follow through and see if we can make it happen. As far as our overall timeline, our ultimate deadline for adoption of the overall comprehensive plan is the end of this year, where we are up against a bit of a crunch, I would say now, is that having a preferred land use alternative allows us to move forward past where we are now with things like housing and transportation and economic development and parks, because that all kind of depends on the land use model, the land use map. I mean, that said, like I said, I don't need a decision next week from council. So if this needs to come back, I will look at our schedule and see if we can make that happen.
Okay, thank you.
If we wanted to specifically request that, would you like a motion and a vote on that, or just us simply expressing that please bring it back to us?
It doesn't need a motion, no.
Well, I would second that. I would very much like to review this again.
My comment on that is, what specifically would you need in order to be able to make a decision? We can talk, but are there specific data points that would enable any of you to be able to move forward?
Well, the expectation is that all the information discussed today, both among ourselves, with staff, and from the public, is all going to be taken before the city council, and they have the responsibility of picking a new direction, and that could either be a modification of one of these existing plans, an additional plan on top of everything else, but that is the expectation, and then the results of that work product would be brought back to us, is what I expect. Can you certainly clarify? And
my understanding of Commissioner Glavin's request is that this would come back to you before it goes to council. Because of your role as a board that can make recommendations, policy recommendations to council. So off of what Commissioner Wolf was saying, yes, if I bring this back to you before we take it to council, it would need to be something different than what I presented today, right? To give you more information with the goal of making a recommendation. As we've discussed previously, it's not a requirement to make a recommendation. I can certainly, with this already scheduled for council next week, I can take everything we heard tonight and bring that to them as is as well. Yeah, but it'd be going to council for a hearing. Typically, there's a clean progression from Planning Commission to council. Is kind of how that works.
I guess the one thing I would, at least from my perspective, and I will certainly let the rest of the council, the commission speak, if it was about further consolidation of information or maybe even investigation by staff to answer questions, it would mainly be, and again, just continuing on the same points, a reevaluation and any adjustment that appears to be appropriate with respect to assumptions on the annexations highlighted in option 2, an additional review of the parcels that were included in option 1 for inclusion but excluded in option 2. And then I would also love to hear a little bit more about kind of what is the reality in how things would be affected in option 2 with regard to the donut hole. For me personally, those are the things where that information would hopefully allow me to a better chance to make a formal decision and recommendation. And I'll let the rest of the commissioners will go ahead and go this direction.
I guess to clarify, my question wasn't a request. Based off of their comments, it was a question for, if we had deadlines or not. Personally, I don't need any further clarification. My mind is more or less made up on the options. I feel like option 2, you're forcing property owners to be within the city. That majority of them are not. But then option 1 is you have site-specific requests where properties are wanting to, be in the UGA. So my mind's kind of already made up.
The one thing I would clarify is that in option 2, as I understand it, nobody's would at all be forced into the city limits. That is not at all part of the plan. What is part of the plan is an assumption of actions taken by individual property owners to request annexation and using the prediction of those numbers to meet our planning needs. But nobody would be forced into the city by either plan.
But then they're not creating any further options for expansion. So more or less, they're being forced to be a part of the city.
I would say I just think we don't have a realistic choice. I think the assumptions that a lot of these property owners are not going to annex is false, and I think it could be within months before someone would apply to annex, and then all of a sudden our plan has to be rebalanced, and that's okay if it has to be rebalanced. I just would like to see what that would actually look like, what some of those trade-offs would be. And so I think if we can see it again, terrific. If not, I think the city council needs to recognize that if they go with that option, it's immediately going to be changed. There's going to have to be a balance that gets made. And there's no choice in front of us as far as I can tell. One's fake.
Any more comments or questions from the commission? Any additional motions from the commission? All right. Well, I guess that concludes the full extent of our public hearing. We're going to move on to our second public comment period. Anyone requesting to speak to the commission may request to speak at this time. And this would be on, obviously, on anything other than the public hearing we just had. If you've not provided notice in advance, please, to speak during this period, please raise your hand, use the raise hand feature in Zoom, or if you're on the phone, press *9 to raise your hand and *6 to mute or unmute, or if you're here in the audience, please feel free to come forward to the podium, give us your name, and you have 3 minutes. Anybody want to speak at this time? Anyone online have any comments? One last call for final public comments. Second comment period closed. All right, Ms. Lust, staff reports, please.
Sure. First of all, I just want to thank everyone who made the time to be here this evening. As far as staff reports go, a follow-up on our last meeting, council did approve Planning Commission's 2025 work plan. So we can start looking at the items in there and chugging through them, hopefully. Yeah. And then the other item from our last meeting that council considered, they actually, in their work session on the 23rd, we talked quite a bit about the proposed community vision statements that Planning Commission reviewed in January, and they by and large were supportive of them as written, with a couple of tweaks that staff are working on. Council's direction to staff was make those tweaks and then get those vision statements in as edited in the plan, and when they're taking the whole comp plan through public hearings, that is when they'll give it their stamp of approval as part of the whole plan. So those are moving forward by and large how you saw them. And I believe that is all I have to share with you. Happy to take any questions though.
Any further questions from the commission before we? All right, we'll go ahead and move on to from the commission, starting at this end.
I don't have anything. Thanks.
I don't have very much. I am happy to announce that any day here I'm going to have a little one. So I ask you to bear with me over this next time. I might be a little bit more, wiry-eyed, red-eyed. This is our first one, so that's exciting. I'm happy to see we have, the new changes to the city council, and seeing that we have a new mayor elected and everything like that. So I hope that I just wanted to say that for all the people, I hope you're seeing these things and seeing the outreach that I appreciate that. I've seen a lot of things online. But that's all I have. New changes coming here for me. Pray for me.
Just to follow up on that, it's the commissioner's first child, so he has no idea, but he's not going to come next month to the planning commission, and I'm out of town as well next month, so we need to make sure we do a good job with attendance, so we have quorum. Thanks to all the members of the public who were here tonight and online. Thanks to Vice Chair Ammerman. I think you did a terrific job thrown to the 3-hour meeting. And of course, thanks to our city staff. Thank you very much for bearing with our questions and preparing us for this evening.
I don't have anything.
And I just have to share that I was at the city council meeting, and they provided really good feedback on the work plan. So I wanted to thank Director Lust and your city team for taking our feedback and our goals and visions and capturing it and putting it into place where council was really happy and said, good job. And thanks to the members of the community that are here and online. And not to forget that there is the levy vote on February 11th for the Ridgefield School District. And yeah, that's all I have. Thank you.
For myself, again, I just really want to thank the staff for all your patience and all your hard work. Especially tonight, we've definitely been throwing around confusion, and I will apologize for how off base I was with my assumption about how something can go to council and come back, and it really does make sense to me. I should have thought about that a little bit more, but it's a tough situation, and I'm even still kind of mixed as to whether it makes sense to come back to us or not. But I will leave that in your capable hands, because I feel if you feel like you have something real to bring to us, that it would make sense. And if you feel like what we've gotten through is about all there is, then taking it to the council as it is might make the most sense. As far as personal reports, I know I've brought it up before, but one of the newer joys of my life, besides my family and my son, and this is partially because of my son, I'm a mentor on the Ridgefield robotics team, the high school robotics team, and that has been going fantastic. But I have to remind people it is essentially a sporting event. So the intensity of spending 53 days building a robot from scratch is just crazy to see. And these kids are absolutely phenomenal. I just can't describe how impressed I am with them. The other event is I also volunteer with the middle school jazz band. And we both had a jazz band concert with the high school last Monday, not this past Monday, but the Monday before. That was a high school jazz concert, but they invited us to join them, and that was fantastic to see and hear. And then we also went later that week to perform at the Clark jazz festival at Clark Community College, and that was an incredible event. It definitely brought back a lot of memories for me since I was originally studying to be a music teacher. So being part of this and watching the experience these kids are having, getting to perform among other peers, to be adjudicated by an adjudicator all the way from New York, and share this experience was a real joy to watch. And unless anyone has anything else, I believe that is it. Meeting adjourned.